Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, be sure to drop your thoughts, feelings, and lessons in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's get into it. The cruelest thing my girlfriend, Brielle Waverly, ever did wasn't cheating. It was the way she shut me down with a smile and turned my loyalty into something she could manage. The night I tried to tell her I'd been stressed and scared, she leaned back on the couch, scrolled her phone, and said, "You can't tell me anything. Not I'm overwhelmed. Not I need a minute." Just that, like my voice was a nuisance she'd finally muted. Then she punished me for being quiet afterward, calling me secretive, unstable, and untrustworthy. Here's how it happened. My name is Omari Felton. I was 34 then, living in Baltimore, Maryland, in a narrow row house that always smelled faintly of detergent because I washed my work clothes the moment I got home. I was an operations coordinator at a packaging and fulfillment facility near the harbor. Nothing glamorous, but the kind of job where everything breaks if you stop paying attention. I liked the order. I liked morning routines. I liked knowing what came next. That made me dependable, and for a while Brielle treated that dependability like it was love. I met Brielle at a friend's housewarming in Federal Hill. She had this polished look, neat braids, minimal jewelry, a steady gaze that made you feel selected. She laughed at my jokes like she understood what I meant beneath them. We talked about music, travel, and how expensive peace felt these days. When I walked her to her car, she said, "You seem like a man who doesn't waste people." At the time, I took it as a compliment. I didn't realize it was also a test. The kind where failing meant being used instead of being left. The first year was smooth. Brielle was thoughtful in public and strategic in private. She remembered my mother's birthday before I did. She brought food when I worked late. She called me steady, like it was a rare and valuable thing. When she moved in, she framed it as a partnership. She offered to help with bills, even though I never asked. She wanted to merge small things first: streaming accounts, grocery budgets, subscriptions. I told myself it was love, building a shared life. I didn't notice she was building a map. Brielle had family in and out of her life like rotating weather. Her cousin Roland Sykes was always around when something needed fixing, lifting, moving, returning, or handling. Roland was charming in an oily way, full of compliments that felt like they were meant for whoever was listening. He called me brother too quickly and asked what I did for work before he ever asked where I was from. The first time he visited, he toured our living room with his eyes, clocking the TV, the laptop, the work bag I set by the door. I kept my personal life separate from work because the facility was the kind of place where gossip traveled faster than pallets. But Brielle was curious about everything, especially my systems. She wanted to know my schedule down to the minute. She wanted the names of my managers, what software we used, how shipments were tracked, what vendors we relied on. If I shrugged it off, she said, "I like knowing your world." If I hesitated, she said, "Why are you acting like I'm the enemy?" I learned early that peace came when I explained myself. Then the pressure shifted. She began to resent any part of me she couldn't control. If I got a compliment at work, she called it luck. If I mentioned a new responsibility, she said, "Don't let them use you." She disliked my friends, especially the ones who asked real questions. She disliked my mother most of all, because my mother could hear what I didn't say. Brielle never shouted. She didn't need to. She delivered small cuts with calm precision, then acted confused when I bled. The first time Brielle made me feel small on purpose, we were at a restaurant in Inner Harbor. The server asked if we were celebrating anything. I said I'd completed a tough quarter and my team hit targets early. Brielle smiled and said, "He thinks he runs the place." It was light enough to pass as teasing, sharp enough to stay in my chest. On the ride home, she said, "You get too proud. Humility keeps men safe." It sounded like advice, but it felt like a leash. I started staying later at work, partly for overtime, partly because the facility was quiet and predictable compared to home. My day started at 5:20 a.m. I'd drink coffee standing up, review shift notes, and walk into the warehouse under bright fluorescent lights that made every decision feel urgent. Brielle started calling mid-shift, asking where I was, asking if I could send her money real quick, asking if I could reorder something with my car because hers was acting weird. There was always a small crisis, always a reason. She began treating my phone like community property. If I turned it face down, she'd raise an eyebrow and say, "Who are you hiding?" If I took a call outside, she'd ask why I needed privacy. If I didn't respond immediately while I was on the floor handling a problem, she'd text, "You always ignore me," then later claim she was joking. She liked me most when I was busy and tired, because tired people don't argue well. Tired people just want quiet. Brielle knew that. The deeper I got in, the more my life started feeling like I was earning permission to exist. When I'd speak about stress, my father's health, a friend's job loss, the constant pressure at work, she would yawn, scroll, or change the subject. But if she had a problem, it became the entire room. If I didn't hold it correctly, she accused me of being cold. That was the first real shift. My emotions became too much, while hers became the weather we all had to live under. The "you can't tell me anything" night happened after a week where everything felt heavy. A forklift accident had damaged inventory, and I'd spent 2 days writing incident reports and coordinating replacements. I came home with my shoulders aching, my brain still buzzing from alarms and deadlines. Brielle was on the couch, legs folded, phone glowing in her hand. I sat beside her and said, "I need to talk." She didn't look up. She sighed and said, "You can't tell me anything." I just stared. I remember the way the ceiling fan sounded, steady and indifferent. I asked what she meant. She said, "You always turn things into something. You always want reassurance. It's exhausting." I told her I wasn't asking her to fix it, just to hear me. She shrugged. "Then talk to your coworkers about it. I'm not your therapist." The word therapist landed like an insult. She turned the volume up on the TV. Her face was calm, like she'd won an argument we hadn't even started. Something in me went quiet. Not dramatic, not angry, quiet like a door closing. I stood up, washed my hands for no reason, and went to bed. Brielle didn't follow. She didn't apologize the next morning. She acted cheerful, like the night before never happened. When I didn't volunteer my thoughts over breakfast, she said, "See, you're in a mood again." That was the trap. If I spoke, I was too emotional. If I stayed silent, I was too secretive. Either way, she got to be the judge. So I made a decision that felt small, but changed everything. I stopped telling her everything. I didn't announce it. I didn't threaten it. I just began to keep my own life inside my own boundaries. I stopped giving her my exact schedule. I stopped listing every issue at work. I stopped showing her pay stubs. I stopped answering questions that didn't feel like love. Brielle noticed immediately. Her eyes tracked me differently. She asked, "Why are you being weird?" I said, "I'm just tired." She smiled like she didn't believe me. The less I shared, the more she relaxed. It was like my silence made her confident. She started leaving for errands more often. She started taking calls in the bathroom. She started sleeping with her phone under her pillow. She stopped pretending to care if I got home safe. She became bolder with disrespect because she assumed I was too afraid to confront her. And I was afraid, not of her leaving, but of the truth I could feel approaching. It's a specific kind of dread when your home starts feeling like a stage and you don't know the script. Around that time, my coworker Tavian Cross began lingering near my desk. Tavian was friendly, always cracking jokes, always offering help. He was the type who moved through the warehouse like he owned it, even though he didn't. He asked questions that sounded casual, but landed too precisely. Who handles your vendor log? You still using that same bank? Have you ever had issues with your account freezing? I laughed it off, but I felt something shift. People don't ask about your finances by accident. Then little inconsistencies started showing up like dust you only see when the light hits. A package arrived for Brielle with a name slightly misspelled. A new set of keys appeared on the counter that weren't mine. A receipt for a dinner in Washington, D.C. sat crumpled in the trash. When I asked, Brielle didn't flinch. She said, "You're checking the trash now?" She didn't deny anything. She simply made my noticing seem shameful. That's a particular cruelty, turning your awareness into your crime. The real warning came when I saw a notification on my phone for a charge I didn't recognize. Not huge, just enough to be ignored if you weren't paying attention. I checked my bank app. Another small charge appeared from a delivery service I never used. I asked Brielle if she'd used my card. She didn't even look guilty. She said, "You're doing this again." Then she added, "You act like you own money. We live together." The word we used sounded like ownership, not partnership. I changed my card and didn't tell her. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it because a quiet part of me finally accepted that I was not safe. I created a new password she couldn't guess. I moved my direct deposit to an account she didn't know about. I opened a separate savings account at a different bank and labeled it something boring. I turned on alerts for every transaction, even small ones. Each step felt like I was becoming someone I didn't want to be: cautious, guarded, strategic. But the alternative was staying naive, and naive people get hurt longer. Brielle noticed the changes like a dog notices a different scent. She asked if I was broke. She asked if I was hiding money. She asked if I was planning something. When I didn't answer, she accused me of cheating. It was so smooth and familiar that it almost sounded rehearsed. Then she began saying my mother put ideas in my head. She began hinting that I was unstable. She began collecting narratives the way people collect evidence when they want to justify what they're already doing. Roland started dropping by more often. He'd show up with a grin, ask for a glass of water, and settle in like he lived there. He offered to help Brielle with random errands, always while watching me with quick, measuring glances. Once, he asked what my work badge looked like. He said he needed one for a new job and wanted to compare. I told him I didn't know. He laughed like I was being difficult. "Man, you don't even know your own badge?" Brielle smiled at him like his questions were normal. I started documenting things without telling anyone. Not for drama, for clarity. I kept a private log. Dates, times, charges, strange mail, comments, and moments that fell off. I took photos of receipts. I screenshot notifications. I saved texts. I didn't do it because I thought I was building a case. I did it because my reality kept getting challenged, and I needed something steady to hold on to. When you live with someone who denies what they did 5 minutes ago, you start doubting your own eyes. Documentation is a form of sanity. My mother, Althea Felton, called me one night and asked, "Are you okay?" Mothers have a way of hearing what you don't say. I told her I was tired. She paused and said, "Tired is one thing. Drained is another." I almost told her everything. I almost let myself be held by someone who would actually care. But Brielle was in the kitchen, and I could feel the air change when she listened. So I kept it light. I said work was stressful. My mother said, "Take care of yourself." Quietly. That word quietly stayed with me. The betrayal became visible in small humiliations. Brielle started inviting people over without asking, then acting like I was rude if I looked uncomfortable. She'd laugh at jokes about me being too serious. She'd correct me in front of others like I was a co-worker she disliked. Tavian came by once with Roland, said they were just in the neighborhood. I watched two men who shouldn't have known each other exchange a look like they were confirming something. Brielle poured drinks like she was hosting a celebration I wasn't invited to. The next week, I got called into a meeting at work about discrepancies in vendor payments. Nothing accusatory at first, just questions. But the questions were specific. Too specific. I felt my stomach tighten. The finance lead asked if I'd authorized a change to a vendor's payment method. I said no. She asked if anyone had access to my workstation. I said it locked automatically. She asked if I clicked any links recently. I said I was careful. She told me there had been unusual activity tied to my login. I left the meeting feeling like the floor had shifted. That night, Brielle acted unusually sweet. She asked about my day. She offered to cook. She touched my shoulder and said, "I miss us." It was the kind of affection that feels like someone trying to calm a situation they created. I gave her nothing. I ate quietly. I said I was tired and went to bed early. Later, I heard her whispering on the phone. I recognized Rellen's name in her soft tone. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Whatever was happening involved more than betrayal. It involved risk. The next morning, I checked my credit report during my break. I don't know why I did it then, like an instinct. And there it was, an inquiry I didn't recognize. Another account listed with a balance that wasn't mine. It felt like being punched without the sound. My hand shook as I scrolled. Someone had attempted to open credit in my name. Someone had enough information to do it. My address, my social life, my employment. The image of Brielle asking about my benefits, my job systems, my bank, all of it clicked into place. I didn't confront her. I didn't call her names. I didn't throw anything. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub with my phone in my hand. I took screenshots. I emailed them to myself from a private account. I froze my credit. I changed security questions. I contacted my bank to flag suspicious activity. I requested a full report from the credit bureaus. Each step felt like swallowing broken glass, but it also felt like control returning. Brielle had treated me like I was powerless. Quiet action proved I wasn't. When I came out, Brielle was in the living room, texting with a smile. She looked up and said, "You okay?" Like she cared. I said, "Fine." She shrugged. "Good. I don't have time for drama today." She left wearing a new perfume I'd never smelled before. Her confidence was almost insulting. She truly believed I was too loyal, too afraid, too attached to do anything. She didn't know that loyalty breaks when it's used as a weapon. She didn't know I'd stopped telling her everything for a reason. I started looking at her choices like data. Brielle's errands lined up with gaps in my schedule she shouldn't have known about unless she was watching. Her calls lined up with times I handled vendor approvals. Rellen's visits lined up with weekends I was exhausted and less alert. Tavian's questions lined up with the discrepancies at work. The story wasn't random. It was coordinated. That made it worse, because coordination requires intention. It requires planning. It requires a kind of coldness that doesn't suddenly appear. Brielle wasn't making mistakes. She was making moves. I spoke to a lawyer quietly, not to launch some public battle, but to understand my options. I didn't want revenge fantasies. I wanted safety. The lawyer asked if our finances were commingled. I said not officially, but she had access to my cards at times. He asked if she was on the lease. I said yes. He asked if I had proof of suspicious activity. I said I was documenting. He told me not to tip her off. He said, "People who lack remorse get desperate when control slips." I felt sick hearing it stated so plainly, but I knew he was right. At work, the compliance team escalated the investigation. They asked me to recount my usual access habits. I did. They asked if I ever logged in from home. I said no. They asked if I shared passwords. I said never. Then they showed me a timestamp of access that occurred during a time I was not at the facility. I felt heat rise in my face. Someone had used my credentials. I remember Brielle watching me type passwords, teasing me about being paranoid. I remembered Relon asking about my badge. I remembered Tavian's questions. I swallowed hard and said, "I think my identity has been compromised." They took it seriously, more seriously than I expected. The facility handled sensitive accounts, and the vendor network was a vulnerable chain. They involved IT security, finance, and legal. I was placed on administrative leave while they investigated, which felt humiliating even though they said it wasn't punitive. I drove home staring at the road like it might explain what I'd missed. Brielle saw me walk in early and said, "Let me guess. You got in trouble." There was satisfaction in her voice. That's how I knew. She wanted me damaged. Being home more should have made things clearer, but it made them heavier. Brielle treated my leave like entertainment. She called it a vacation you didn't earn. She told Relon on speakerphone that I was finally being humbled. I listened from the hallway, my jaw tight. Relon laughed and said, "He'll learn." Brielle didn't correct him. She didn't defend me. She didn't care that my livelihood was at stake. She cared that the man she thought she controlled was losing footing. Some people mistake your stability for arrogance. They want to see you shaken, just to prove you can be. The next discovery came through the mail, a letter from a lender about an account I never opened. Brielle picked it up first, glanced at it, and tossed it onto the counter like it was junk. I watched her too closely. She didn't look confused. She looked mildly annoyed, like the mail had arrived at the wrong time. I waited until she left the room, then opened it and took photos. My hand was steady now, not shaking. Fear had turned into focus. I remember my mother's words, quietly. That night, I confronted Brielle with a question that wasn't a full accusation. "Have you used my information for anything?" She didn't blink. She laughed once, short and sharp, and said, "You sound crazy." I asked again. She leaned closer and said, You're not about to start interrogating me in my own home." Then she added, "This is why I said you can't tell me anything. You take everything and twist it." She called me dramatic. She called me insecure. She didn't ask why I was worried. She didn't offer to help. She simply defended her control. No remorse, just power. After that, I stopped seeing her as my partner. I started seeing her as a risk I had to manage until I could safely remove it from my life. I slept with my phone under my pillow. I kept my keys in my pocket. I moved important documents, birth certificate, passport, employment records, into a locked drawer at work through a friend in HR. I didn't feel proud. I felt sad. There's grief in realizing the person you build a routine around was building a plan around you. Love should make you softer. With Brielle, love had made me hypervigilant. A friend I trusted, Malin Price, worked in a different department. She'd always seemed kind, brought donuts on Fridays, asked about my mother, offered rides when my car was in the shop. I told her, carefully, that I was dealing with identity issues and asked if she'd heard anything unusual. Malin's eyes flickered. Just a fraction. She said, "No, but people talk." Then she added, too quickly, "You'll be fine." The way she said it felt like she already knew the ending. I left that conversation with my stomach tight. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a person calming you because they helped start the fire. The investigation at work began revealing patterns. The unauthorized access traced to a device that had been near my home network at certain times. IT couldn't accuse anyone outside the company without law enforcement, but they could show that my credentials were being used in coordinated ways. Vendor payment changes, new accounts, rerouted confirmations. The fraud wasn't random. It was a scheme, and it didn't just threaten my job, it threatened my name. I asked compliance what I should do. They told me to file a police report and cooperate fully. I did, quietly, without telling Brielle. Filing a report felt humiliating, like admitting I'd been careless, even though I knew I hadn't. The officer asked if anyone close to me could have access to my information. I stared at the desk, the pen in my hand, and said, yes. Saying yes felt like swallowing something hot. I gave them names, Brielle Waverly, Relon Sykes, and anyone tied to my home. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't add drama. I gave dates and evidence. The officer's tone changed when he saw the credit inquiries and account attempts. He said, "This looks coordinated." I nodded, because coordinated was the word I'd been afraid to say out loud. I started planning my exit. Not like a movie, like a grown man who needed his life back. I looked for apartments quietly, toured places during work hours under the excuse of errands, and saved listings in a folder Brielle couldn't access. I contacted the landlord about removing myself from the lease at renewal, but the renewal wasn't soon. The lawyer advised me to leave sooner if I could do it safely, even if it meant paying to break the lease. He said, "Your safety and your finances are more expensive than a penalty." That sentence made everything painfully clear. Brielle sensed distance and responded by tightening control. She started accusing me of cheating almost daily. She started showing up at the facility parking lot while I was still on leave, as if to remind people she existed. She wanted visibility, not love. She told me she'd been praying about my attitude, like my boundaries were a spiritual flaw. She said, "You're going to lose me acting like this." I looked at her and realized something simple. I'd already lost her. Not recently. A long time ago. I had just been paying the bill for it. The worst part wasn't even the accusations. It was the way she recruited others to treat me like a villain. Relon called me ungrateful for questioning Brielle. Malin stopped making eye contact at work. Tavian began acting offended, as if my caution was disrespectful. Brielle's friends visited and spoke around me, not to me, like I was an employee in my own house. If I entered a room, conversation stopped. If I asked what was funny, Brielle said, "Nothing. You always think it's about you." That's how abandonment feels in a crowded room. Everyone together, you alone. The compliance team eventually cleared me of direct wrongdoing, but kept the investigation open because my credentials were involved. They offered me a transfer to a different facility for security reasons once things stabilized. It wasn't framed as a reward. It was framed as a protective move, and I accepted without hesitation. The new location was in Charlotte, North Carolina. A fresh start, a new network, fewer eyes. I didn't tell Brielle right away. I didn't know her my future. She had already used my past. When Brielle finally learned about the transfer, it wasn't because I told her. It was because she heard it through someone who heard it at work, likely Tavian. She confronted me with rage disguised as concern. "So, you just gonna leave me?" she snapped. I asked, "Do you want to come?" She smiled like I'd insulted her. "I'm not following you. I have a life." Then she added, "You'll be back. You always come back." That certainty was the most painful part. She believed my loyalty was permanent, even after she tried to ruin me. She believed I existed to recover and return. I moved quietly. I didn't pack in front of her. I moved essentials to a storage unit a little at a time. Clothes, documents, my grandmother's watch, the framed photo of my mother, smiling on a porch in D.C. Each trip felt like unthreading myself from a trap. Brielle noticed the missing items and laughed. "What? You making a secret escape plan?" she said, amused. She thought it was a joke because she couldn't imagine consequences applying to her. That's the mindset of someone who never feels remorse. They assume other people will always absorb the damage. The day I left, I didn't argue. I waited until Brielle went out. Then I loaded the last boxes into my car. I left a short note. "I'm safe. Do not contact my job. Do not contact my family. Future communication goes through my attorney." It wasn't dramatic. It was clean. I drove south with my hands locked on the wheel, heart pounding, feeling both grief and relief. I thought I would cry. I didn't. I felt emptied out, like my body had been holding tension for months and finally put it down. Charlotte greeted me with warm air and unfamiliar streets. I rented a small apartment in a quiet complex, nothing fancy, but it was mine alone. I bought a new mattress because I wanted a rest to feel real, not borrowed. I changed my phone number. I updated every account. I lived like a man protecting a perimeter. I went to work, came home, cooked simple meals, and sat in silence without being punished for it. The quiet was not lonely. It was healing. And every day, I felt a little less like someone's target. Back in Baltimore, the investigation tightened. The police report plus the compliance trail created pressure. Fraud schemes survive on people staying embarrassed and quiet. I wasn't quiet anymore, not in the way Brielle needed. I stayed private, but I stopped absorbing harm silently. IT traced the access patterns further. Payment reroutes pointed to accounts tied to Rellen's network. Tavian's device was flagged in a way that couldn't be explained away by coincidence. Malin's involvement surfaced through messages that connected people who claimed they barely knew each other. It was all connected, just like I'd felt in my bones. Brielle didn't call to apologize when she realized I was gone. She called to threaten. She left voicemails from unknown numbers saying I owed her closure. She messaged my mother with a fake sweetness, claiming she was worried about me and asking where I was. My mother didn't respond. Brielle reached out to my coworkers, saying I was unstable, saying I was on drugs, saying I stole from her. Each lie was meant to pull me back into the mud with her. Remorse would have sounded like accountability. Brielle sounded like control, scrambling to return. I saved every message and forwarded them to my attorney, quietly. Then karma arrived the way it usually does in real life. Not as lightning from the sky, but as paperwork and consequences stacking up until there's nowhere left to stand. Relon was arrested after a routine traffic stop revealed outstanding warrants tied to the fraud case. Once he was in custody, investigators moved quickly. Tavian was terminated after internal evidence showed he'd facilitated access and communicated about vendor reroutes. Malin was placed under investigation for aiding and covering. Nothing dramatic, no handcuffs on a warehouse floor, just a sudden cold shift where people stopped protecting her. Brielle's consequences came fast because her lifestyle had been floating on borrowed money and stolen stability. With my accounts locked down and my support removed, her late payments caught up. Her car was repossessed early in the morning. Tow truck, paperwork, no negotiation. She called and screamed in a voicemail like volume could undo math. The landlord filed notices when her portion of rent fell behind. She tried to claim I abandoned her financially, but the paper trail showed we were not married, my attorney was involved, and her own actions were under scrutiny. When you build your comfort on someone else's foundation, losing them feels like collapse. The final blow wasn't public. It wasn't a viral moment. It was private, humiliating, and real. Brielle was formally named in a civil claim tied to identity fraud and financial damages. Not because I wanted spectacle, but because evidence led there. She couldn't charm her way out of documents. She couldn't accuse her way out of timestamps. She couldn't call me dramatic in front of a judge and make numbers disappear. She didn't show remorse even then. She blamed everyone else. She said she was set up. She called me vindictive. But the record didn't care about her tone. Reality is not moved by denial. In Charlotte, my life changed in ways nobody clapped for, and that was the point. I took the transfer and rebuilt trust with a new team. I kept my finances organized and private. I paid down debt that wasn't even mine just to clean my name faster. I started sleeping full nights. I started running again in the mornings, not to punish my body, but to remind myself I was still here. I visited my mother on weekends sometimes, sitting in her kitchen while she talked about small things, weather, neighbors, recipes, because small things felt sacred after chaos. Months later, I saw a message request from Brielle on a new social account. She wrote as if nothing happened. We should talk. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just entitlement, like my silence, was a phase she could outwait. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I blocked her without responding. That was my comeback, as simple as that. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to win an argument. I didn't need her to understand. Some people don't get closure because closure is not something they deserve from the person they harmed. I learned something hard in that season. There are people who want access, not intimacy. They want your information, not your heart. They want your stability, not your love. When Brielle said, "You can't tell me anything," she thought she was taking something from me. She didn't realize she was giving me a lesson that would save my life. Silence isn't always withdrawal. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's the moment you stop feeding a fire and start building a door. I never got a dramatic apology. I never got a teary confession. Brielle never softened, not even when consequences hit. But I didn't need softness from someone who used cruelty as a language. I got something better. My own peace, my own home, my own name repaired by quiet work and careful choices. And every time I wake up in my Charlotte apartment, sunlight coming through the blinds, phone quiet, bank alerts clean, I remember the truth that carried me out. When someone tells you they don't want to hear you, believe them and stop giving them the parts of you they will only misuse. If you stay to the end, you just watch private karma done the real way. No speeches, no clout, just consequences. Subscribe for more stories where the comeback is quiet but brutal, and comment peace if you believe the strongest revenge is rebuilding your life where they can't reach you. The end.